Elvis, Baz Luhrmann's newest movie, is being marketed as this epic Elvis biopic that is going to show you not only his life, but his music, and basically answer the question, who was Elvis? But does it really answer that? Or is it more like a mildly entertaining documentary that may not even be true? Hey y'all, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be reviewing Baz Luhrmann's Elvis and kind of answer whether or not you should go see this film in theaters, because I definitely kind of have an opinion about it. The first and foremost thing is I don't think it's necessarily accurate to its marketing. Elvis, the film, follows not really Elvis, which is kind of, odd to have your titular character not be like the main focus of the film. I would argue that this film is about the relationship between Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's longtime manager, and Elvis, and I think it skews a little heavier onto Tom Parker's side. And the reason I feel this way is because there's a lot of narration from him. There's a lot of rhetorical questions sort of that he asks the audience. And from the beginning, you're kind of introduced to him as potentially an unreliable narrator. And very quickly, I would argue the film paints him as the antagonist. But Elvis isn't really the protagonist. And I think this is where this film is maybe more complex than I'm going to give it credit for today. And I'm going to leave that opinion up to you. But I would argue that this film doesn't really have a protagonist, and or that the protagonist is the audience itself, which is kind of a stretch, I know. But there's a lot of things that are affected by this triangular relationship in the film between Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis, and then the audience being his fans in the 60s, as well as us today. And that kind of triangular relationship creates like the conflict in the film. In this relationship, personally, I feel that Elvis becomes a little bit of a side character. And this is where it becomes kind of difficult for me to say whether or not Austin Butler, who plays Elvis, is really that great in the role or not. It's been something I've been kind of thinking about for about a week now since I saw the film, because I think personally he was picked because of his looks and the fact that he can dance and sing. Now, what he does with the dancing and singing is incredibly impressive, and I fully believed that that was Elvis that I was watching. Like, I fully believed this is not a performer impersonating Elvis, because there's been thousands of them, if not millions, but this is truly like Elvis's story come to life. So there's definitely that element that Butler is able to bring to the film and the character of Elvis in this film. However, I feel like there aren't enough scenes where I really get to see his acting chops beyond just the impression of what Elvis would say or do. A lot of the mystique of Elvis is really portrayed in his role, and therefore I can't tell you whether he did a good job of portraying that or it's very stale. Kind of the same way people talked about Kristen Stewart in Twilight. She's playing the character of Bella as written, however people took it as she's a bad actress because she's just being very bland and non-reactionary. So that's where I have a really hard time, because of course the Oscar buzz is going to come up whenever somebody plays a character like this in a biopic film, because it's so iconic. Elvis Presley is one of the most iconic people in all of American history, and so that's just, Austin Butler already had a high bar for him, and I personally don't feel like it's an award-worthy performance. However, I think it will get him enough buzz and critical reception as it should to get him roles that might eventually get him to that place, or to a point where we see him in a more impressive role. And I honestly do think it's very impressive of him to get this role, granted that a lot of the other things that I looked up on his IMDb, his past working history, not like top caliber stuff necessarily, not trying to shade on any of the Disney Channel projects or the Carrie Diaries that he was previously a part of, but they're just not to the same standard as a Baz Luhrmann film. Just do with that information what you will. I think the biggest problem I have with this film, or the biggest problem I feel that this film has that's gonna make it feel weighed down, it's not gonna be what people necessarily are hoping and expecting it to be, is it is 42 years of Elvis's life, pretty much, or cradle to grave. That's the kind of biopic we're looking at here, with a few exceptions. 42 years in 2 hours and 40 minutes. That is a long film. This film could have taken so many segments of Elvis's life and made that into a more compelling story than what this film is. In my Top Gun review, I talked about how that movie is so much greater than the sum of its parts. This film, the sum of the parts are greater than the whole, to be quite honest. There are segments of this film that portrayed an Elvis that I never knew. I did not know of his history with the black musical influences in his past, which if you do some research and digging into, which I'll get in a little bit, Some people are contentious about that. I did not know about his 68 comeback special. I just always thought that Elvis was Elvis. I didn't know that there was a time period where he was maybe on the outs or like not as popular. And then I think there's also the Vegas residency. Any one of those angles in the film, as well as his relationship with Priscilla or anything else, right? Anything less cradle to grave, those could have all been movies on their own. I mean, Being the Ricardos is a perfect example of taking a couple different elements from Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz's life and putting them into a 1-week film. I feel like that could have been done in this movie and would have been way more enjoyable than what it was. Even I would argue that Bohemian Rhapsody, which I know gets a lot of crap online, I personally love the film. It does have this great building up towards the Live Aid concert at the end of the film, gives it a gravitas that this film poorly suffers without, in my humble opinion. There could have just been much more poignant or interesting angle on Elvis's life, and yet covering all of it somehow makes it seem kind of less important. And the other thing that I feel that kind of weakens this film is Baz Luhrmann's style. Now, don't get me wrong, I am a huge fan of The Great Gatsby from around 2013 starring Leonardo DiCaprio, which is a Baz Luhrmann movie. But this film, the energy of it is very rock and roll, and to me that became very overstimulating. There's a lot happening on screen, a lot of elements that do really put you in this time period of Elvis's kind of peak of fame of like the 60s and 70s. You really kind of get thrust into that. However, it's kind of overwhelming, and me and the person I went to go see this film with, both of us left kind of with a headache. Now, Baz Luhrmann has a lot of different stylistic elements. While I didn't care necessarily for the visual ones on screen, the man knows how to make an entertaining movie music performance as well as create a killer soundtrack. Like, this soundtrack for this film and the way it was weaved into this movie, absolutely incredible, like fantastic. But I do just think it's weighed down a little bit by the fact that there's so much going on screen that Elvis doesn't seem like the brightest shining star in the film, again making it difficult to know whether Butler's performance was like Oscar award worthy or if it was just sort of a really good impression. I think the biggest part is that real life is more complicated than you could ever make it in a movie, and I can't tell again if this film, by having so many elements, portrays that complexity, or if it really just says Colonel Tom Parker bad, Elvis good, but tragic. Ultimately, I just left the theater feeling like any other specific angle of Elvis's life or period of time in his life could have made a more interesting and cohesive movie than what this ended up being. This movie really did have a Citizen Kane-esque element to it, where it kind of is an exploration of this man's life. Now, research you do afterwards might prove to show that everything that seems pretty clear-cut in the film is a lot more complicated in real life, and there's definitely a heightened and fabricated element to this film. And I think that's something that I just kind of find as a hard pill to swallow for this film. I just really do have this kind of middle of the road opinion about it, and that's why I personally can't recommend that you go see it in theaters. What do you think about Elvis? Have you seen it? Are you going to see it? Are you looking forward to it? Please let me know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching this video. I would absolutely love if you liked it, and hit the subscribe button to join this community and never miss one of my movie reviews or television videos or literally anything else that I make. I hope you have an absolutely amazing day or night whenever you're getting to watch this, and I will see you in my very next video. Bye, y'all.